Agriculture now is one of the world's biggest contributors to climate change, contributing 11% of global GHG emissions. And as I was mentioning in the TED Talk I did recently, the top 10 emitting countries emitted 7.7 ton of greenhouse gas emissions per person, per capita. That's the weight of an orca whale in gases per person.
Hi everyone, I'm Shubhra, and I am very excited to be presenting the first episode of our new podcast called Greennovation. I'm joined by my amazing co-host and very good friend, Sia. Sia, do you want to say hi?
Hi guys.
Hey. We're actually based on opposite sides of the world. We are incredibly excited to be starting off the series. A very inspiring individual, also a woman, who's designed and built from scratch a company called Regrow. Her name is Anastasia Volkova. She's based in the USA and she's been working on her company Regrow for the past 5 years, which is an agricultural startup. And they basically use monitoring and verification software using dronetech to make farming practices more sustainable for the world. And it's based on this concept called regenerative agriculture. So I guess everyone knows about organic farming, but what we may not know is there are actually better practices than organic farming. And Anastasia, she started the company acknowledging from when she was a child, when she grew up in Ukraine, for example, that there were certain practices that were being underutilized, but were really effective in both growing crops and providing enough crop yields, but also sustainable and not impacting the environment negatively. So this is what her company does. They've raised £20 million as of last summer, and they've raised from a variety of investors, very high profile investors actually as well, like Microsoft M12, Cargill, Ajax. So it's a really cool company. Actually very surprised that we got her for the first episode. Very excited as well.
I just wanted to point out, just to give a perspective on this, and you can carry on. I just looked it up. In 2019, less than 3% of all VC investment went to women-led companies.
Wow, that's really sad. And I think kind of on that topic as well, and one of the things that we want to address on the podcast is huge disparities here between the funding that male versus female founders receive. And so I think we want to try and focus as far as possible on female founders.
And what she's done in a really short space of time, I guess it's attributed to her background as well. She holds a PhD in aeronautical engineering, and she's moved from the engineering to looking at sustainable agriculture, which is quite an amazing and quite a drastic shift.
I think one of the biggest things here that we learned from this episode when we recorded it the other day was how crazy that soil can sequester 1/3 of the world's carbon if it was used effectively. I think that was very interesting.
I mean, her work aside, that's definitely one of the most fascinating facts that we learned about when we were talking to her. But I think another very interesting aspect of our podcast is looking at the founder stories themselves. And I found her very inspiring.
Yeah. And her company's 5 years old, and she started this company when she was like 25, which was crazy.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And she's already gained so much recognition. She's been featured on MIT's Review magazine, the Innovators Under 35 section, BBC's Top 100 Women, Forbes. She's been on TEDx twice. And I mean, this is an inspiration for all the startup founders, all the dreamers, and I guess all the women who are looking to make a difference in this space.
Exactly. Well, we're just super excited about bringing this podcast to you, and we're super excited about talking to Anastasia. She said so many amazing things, like what Regrow are doing, how it's disrupting the world, how it's changing practices. We talk about carbon trading, and she even goes into her own funding challenges. She talks about her challenges as a woman founder. I really do think her viewpoints are so profound, and the way that she says things is just so interesting.
Exactly. So that said, let's dive into it.
Yeah. So without further ado, take it away. Anastasia, welcome to Greennovation.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a privilege to be in your first episode.
So Anastasia, before we get into the nitty-gritty and in light of all your achievements to date, I'm just curious to ask, what gets you up in the morning?
It's such a big question. There's so much to what we do in the space of agri-food tech, climate impact. And I think trying to summarize it, what gets me out in the morning is that I believe this job needs to be done. I believe in it so much that I get up in the morning to do it, whatever it takes. And I'm motivated by impact and by, of course, working with a brilliant team. Because I think for a professional, all you can ask for is have an amazing team and work on something worthy that will impact lives of other people.
That's amazing. And I think that links quite well into my next question. When you were younger, your career goal was to join Airbus and build airplanes. But then it was during your PhD research, which was focused on visual drone navigation, you decided to sort of pivot away from that and focus on building your agricultural startup. Could you just talk to us more about this journey of yours and your decision from building up in the air solutions for a company to swiveling firmly back down to earth, if I may say?
Yeah, and into the soil health, down deep. Yes, exactly. I think when you're growing up, it's really hard to see what the different careers entail on a day-to-day basis. So if I were to give advice to my younger self, I would try to get even more exposure to what it actually means to do a certain job within the company that I was interested in applying to when I would grow up, so to speak. So I think, especially in engineering, it's difficult. The unfamiliarity that I had, having my granddad be an engineer, having my father be an engineer, having my mom be an engineer, like what does it actually entail and how many different types of engineering are there? And that you would apply the tools to a problem. You wouldn't just want to go and do a job because you want to, sometimes you want to play with cool tech, but at some point that can get old and you actually want to have a reason to get up in the morning. And this is where I started looking. It's like, okay, I acquired this technical expertise. I really wanted to understand this technology that fascinated me. But now just working in a company that just builds up on that technology for the sake of, for example, enhancing the transportation industry, is actually not in line with my values, which are to prevent the climate crisis. And I had that realization when I was quite young that something seems to be not right and not enough people are paying attention. And if I can, I should really dig more into it, understand how real the problem is, scientifically, technically, and maybe to find a way to apply my skills to something that will help us preserve the planet for future generations. So you can say in one way, humanity is selfish because that's what we want to do. Like we want our kids to be able to prosper on this planet. But that's what drove me to seek application of the skills and engineering expertise that I acquired to an industry that would actually enable me to make an impact on something tangibly that is connected to climate change. And agriculture, given where I grew up in Ukraine, was a perfect candidate. I understood what that industry was about. When I started learning more about it, I understood that it was also a really good fit with the skills that I had and with the technologies that I was able to comprehend the applications of. So not a very short journey, a lot of misrealizations and then counter-realizations, but I think every journey is not winded. And it's so much easier sometimes in podcasts to tell a story. It's like, and one day I woke up and understood I wanted to do X, Y, Z, but actually it was like 30 years of waking up and searching for an answer.
Yeah, it's interesting how you said we're selfish, the fact that we want to preserve the environment for our kids. Whereas when I think of it, I just think the opposite, that those people who are actually thinking about the future generations are the unselfish ones. So that's like a different perspective, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just that, humanity is wired for survival and it's very primal instinct. And so how do we survive in long term? I guess we want to have new generations to come after us and to be better and to build upon what we've built. So I think that desire definitely transcends our kind of personal attachment to anything we've got, but it's still to propagate our species.
That's really amazing, Anastasia. On a related note, when you're talking about the space that you're working in, could you dive a little bit deeper into why agriculture is so important right now in the climate change crisis? And also talk about the scale of the issue and also the opportunity it presents as also a solution to the issue.
Exactly. You've summarized it really well. It's really important for people to understand how we got here, which to me was a huge surprise because I grew up in Ukraine. Yes, I saw big industrial farms, but the way that we were farming our couple acres, a couple, 1 hectare was quite different. It wasn't conventional. Yes, there was certain use of herbicides and things that would help us control invasive species or pesticides. But then understanding that crop rotation and industrializing agriculture got us to a point where in countries that produce most of the world's food, it actually causes a huge environmental problem because we're trying to be quite extractive when treating the system with synthetic nutrients instead of supporting its natural ability to defend itself and regenerate and create nutrients with the natural cycle. And so humanity needed to understand how to grok the problem of growing a lot more food per unit time and space. And we done that really well with invention of the Haber-Bosch process that leads to creation of synthetic nitrogen that gets applied everywhere. So definitely we wouldn't be where we are today if we haven't figured out how to feed the world and how to feed our way out of devastating conflicts that have engulfed the world in the 20th century. The way that we prioritize our crops and create kind of synthetic or artificial monoculture environments is not good for pollinators, for biodiversity of wildlife, and that creates further problems downstream with the fact that we're really changing the landscape. We have changed it very significantly since we've been plowing when we were very small population of humans in Fertile Crescent, where you figured out how to plow the ground. And the simple process of plowing that allowed us to put seeds into the ground actually breaks up the structure of the soil and it releases carbon out of the soil. And now the climate crisis, with all of the emissions up in the atmosphere and us accelerating our rate of emissions, is really getting scientists alarmed because if we did not revert our trajectory of adding more emissions up to the atmosphere and becoming more and more unsustainable in food production, that is not going to end well because what the climate does mean more devastation for food production. Agriculture now is one of the world's biggest contributors to climate change, contributing 11% of global GHG emissions. And as I was mentioning in the TED Talk I did recently, that the top 10 emitting countries emitted 7.7 ton of greenhouse gas emissions per person per capita. That's the weight of an orca whale in gases per person. And so we have this disproportionate situation where main producers of food, who we of course need to thank for feeding the planet, are also currently forced to do so in a way that is not sustainable for their soil and in a way that's not sustainable for the environment.
Yeah, it's crazy when you put it in the perspective of an oracle whale as well. You raise two issues there. One is the inefficient usage of our agricultural land is contributing, as you said, 11% to the world's carbon emissions. And secondly, we're not going to be able to sustain crop yields, which will inhibit us from even having enough food in the future. Could you explain where the concept of regenerative agriculture comes into this?
Yes, absolutely. So we work on regenerating soil health. We look to help farmers and food companies actually implement the strategies that often are put under the umbrella of regenerative agriculture. So I think it's important to understand that these practices are not new. No one's invented these good agronomy practices yesterday. What's enabled these practices, and I'll touch in more detail on what exactly they are, is of course the development of technology. So not so long ago, we invented as humanity the way of planting seeds of crops directly into the soil by only cutting out small openings and shooting the seeds down into the soil, which prevents us from needing to turn the whole soil over. So that's called, for example, no-till planting. So the other practices, apart from no-till, include cover cropping. So having a living root in the ground at all times so that those microorganisms are happy and engaged. That living root can be doing different things. In some areas where it snows, people do plant crops like winter wheat, for example, in Ukraine, where I grew up. You usually have the crop emerge and grow a little bit under the snow. It's a pretty surprising notion for anyone who hasn't seen it. But then the microorganisms actually keep working on feeding that crop, and they're involved in building up more nutrients in the soil. So it's very good for both the structure as well as the life under the topsoil. So those are the practices. There's more, of course. There's integrated livestock, integrated agroforestry. These are all the practices that now we are able to invest into with farmers. Farmers are very interested in making their farms more resilient. And we as consumers need to get more educated on this issue, just like we once did on why organic may be good for us. Why would regenerative, sustainably farmed crop would be good for us and for the planet?
That's so interesting. You cited some examples from, traditional farming practices from when you were growing up as well, the ones that you've observed in Ukraine, for example. So on that note, I'm curious to know what sort of scale has Regrow achieved already and how much does it expect to grow further in order to make the most meaningful global impact? And noting how soil can sequester about a third of the world's carbon.
Yes, isn't that fascinating? That if we figured out how to help every farmer to manage the land in a way that help crops pull the carbon out of the atmosphere, you can actually sequester a lot of carbon. And carbon is not a bad thing. Like, we are carbon-based life forms. So everything's carbon. It's a building block for life. It's right under our feet. And we need to figure out how to use it better. So currently at Regrow, we monitor 200 million acres of land across 45 countries, with a little heavier concentration in main agricultural producing countries, of course. By monitoring, I mean that we gather the data and watch trends on how the regenerative agriculture adoption is going in those areas. And then we run scientific biogeochemical models that basically tell us, well, under these conditions that have been observed with these actions that apparently the farmer has taken based on the satellite imagery, we should be seeing a loss or sequestration of carbon in this area. And those models also allow us to run scenarios. So when farmers and food companies are interested in investing in the system and making changes, you can actually simulate what would the changes mean for your farm, both financially as well as on the ecosystem level, how much more carbon you'd be sequestering, what would be the soil health metrics that you'd be building up. And so I'm very glad that we got to a point where after 5 years of working with farmers and recently working with food companies, we've learned how to build software that is enabling farmers to make these decisions and is based on credible scientific discoveries and developments. According to some statistics, Cargill touches 1/4 of the world's agricultural production. And so at Regrow, we're just very excited to work with companies such as Cargill and with the different food brands who also have really wide and deep reach to implant this new technology, to provide training to farmers on the technology and the practices and help make a difference.
Do you think the farmers which you have onboarded, they are sort of primarily on board with it because they can improve their crop yields and it's better for them from a commercial perspective? Or are there any other reasons why farmers, might be on board with the mission?
It's a very important question. What motivates everybody participating, especially farmers? It's interesting how it's the same thing that drives all humans. They want to pass their land to next generations. And they want to pass that land in very good condition. So it helps feed the family. So if your family is on the farm, stays on the farm, because it's a particular lifestyle and it's a hard-working one. It's romanticized often, but if you've ever worked on a commercial farm, it's grueling work. But at the same time, you're, at the risks of weather events that are out of your control. So if you can do anything to make the system more resilient, which improved soil health and improved soil function does, of course you'd be interested in doing so. It's then a question of finance. And so in the case of regenerative agriculture, currently the payments for carbon sequestration are not yet as high as they need to be for farmers to be seeing regenerative agriculture adoption as a no-brainer. So it's still, there's room for growth there. There's a way to go for us to really help bring the value of the ecosystem services, and some may say specifically of the price of carbon, to a point where farmers get incentivized directly by it. Right now, the programs that they get invited into are helping them in conjunction with other payments, often government payments, to bridge the gap of the investment that needs to be made in order to transition to regenerative agriculture practices. This does entail purchasing or leasing expensive equipment. So whilst the farmers are driven by, I believe, very human and very noble cause of making sure that their farm can be productive and resilient and stay in the family for many generations, they also need help from society, government, and private sector to make that transition financially, which is where it's a little bit more sticky long term. A lot of farmers who have adopted these practices and now serve as case studies, as the luminaries of regenerative agriculture, who've adopted it decades ago, you can see the effect on their land. And often this means that they can really get off the so-called fertilizer treadmill, like not use synthetic inputs on the farm and be fully self-sustaining. It's pretty phenomenal to see, but these transformations take time.
And when it comes to sequestering carbon, you also think about carbon trading as another opportunity for farmers. I think it's an area which is misunderstood, both in terms of how the system works and also its integrity. Could you just explain what Regrow's impact is here, and maybe to start with what the issues are in this part of the value chain?
Yeah, you're spot on. We want to make sure that agriculture can be seen and rewarded without being scrutinized in a non-productive way for its ability to support ecosystem climate positive practices. So if in principle, science supports that by changing these practices, you'll be sequestering more carbon, of course, you want to have a way of verifying how much carbon does any individual farmer put into their soil bank? How much carbon are they sequestering on their land? This is a question that if you could measure carbon on a year-by-year basis, would be probably easier to answer, although would be very costly to answer, because measurement of soil carbon involves having the specialized crew out there taking soil core samples, send them to the lab, going through the combustion process, figuring out all the necessary details to really say how much carbon is in that soil. So our company, Regrow, offers software for measurement, reporting, and verification of both reduced emissions and carbon sequestration in agriculture. We took all the different studies that existed academically that show if you make these changes on the farm, this is the sequestration change, or this is the avoided emission. We took all of those studies we could possibly find, curated a data set with them, and ran the model many times against it to calibrate it, but also to show how's it performing. We then submitted the report to protocols that govern how credits from agriculture can be created, or how can the value of what the farmers are providing to the society can be incorporated in the value chain? How can become compensated for their value? And that is a pretty rigorous process, as you can hear me. So we're all working in the industry on making that very transparent, science-based, science-driven process that can be audited and verified. The challenge that's being often posed to agriculture that, well, we cannot measure, it's too expensive. There's actually ways right now that at scale and over a longer period of time, we can measure and verify this. Those credits could be sold elsewhere to like oil companies or other energy companies, or for the sake of the argument, any other industry sector that needs to reduce their emissions. But could understand logically that this means that that other sector wouldn't necessarily be forced to reduce their emissions because they could actually take what's called offsets from farmers. And that's not the world we want to live in. We want the totality of emissions to go down rather than for some areas to really work on their GHG footprint and for some other industries to just be able to benefit from someone else's work. So what we advocate a lot more for, and what the industry finds a lot more interesting, and now these programs are prevalent, is actually farmers working with their food processors and then working with food companies to bring products to supermarket shelves that bear the value of those better practices and be able to engage consumer in a premium product lines in order to pay back. Whilst this is not going to immediately help make airline industry look better, I think it's important for everyone to really focus on net zero, because that's the only thing that will stop our planet from warming up.
So kind of moving a little bit away from the climate side, just wanted to talk a bit about the personal challenges you faced starting a mission-focused company. And I guess an obvious place to start would be your funding. Raising your £20 million Series A, I'm just curious, the majority of venture capitalists, they're not primarily impact investors, and hence a set of financial KPIs would rank ahead of any impact-driven ones. What was the discussion that you're having with investors in terms of how expectations would be managed?
Yeah, this question has been asked quite often when you're trying to raise from impact investors. Is it different from raising from just normal investors? Up until COVID hit, the answer that VCs would give us all would be Well, impact funds are just funds where you have like all the normal expectations plus the impact expectations. So there wasn't a question of trade-off. This was really a question of, well, you have to be performing financially, and this is what you're expected to do, but also you're expected to be doing good in the world, which I think has changed quite significantly. Both COVID hit and people have realized how much of an area of an opportunity climate technology is. Luckily, there have been funds like Ajax Strategies that we've been fortunate to attract into our Series A. That was a $17 million US Series A. They actually have been in climate and deep tech for a while. And it was great to actually have a partner who understands what should be expected of a deep tech company at this stage. And they help level the conversation with other investors and I guess make it more realistic. We also have some strategic investors from the industry, so they also have realistic expectations of what can be achieved. So I guess we're in a fortunate position that we have very direct and transparent conversations with our investors. Yes, we want to grow our business because we want to grow our impact. And the more we can grow our business, the more we can grow our impact. And those are really mutually beneficial things. So in terms of how VCs evaluate, I would emphasize that it's really important to attract investors that truly understand what you're trying to achieve or not, and they're not expecting something else from who you could be, but who you're not. I think aligning those expectations at the outset, during the capital raising process, during even the process of just meeting investors, getting an idea of what metrics they're most interested in, should give a founder, a startup CEO and founder, a really good idea as to whether that investor could be a potential fit for them. I can only say that there's plenty of capital out there right now. And if the company is a good company that's doing something worthy and it's on the right trajectory, there should be investors you can find who will be aligned with your vision on how you want to grow the company and where it needs to be.
That's interesting, and something that we also wanted to know as two young women at the start of our careers ourselves. We wanted to know, for you as a female founder, did you experience any challenges on that front in starting and growing your business? And what are your key takeaways from these experiences?
Yeah, I hope that the generation of our daughters will never ask this question. I want to start with that. They will just not know that this question needs to be asked because this is not a challenge they will encounter. And I strongly believe that the world will get there by the next generation. The reason I believe that is because just in the time that I have been raising money, it's changed very significantly. So in the 5 years of this company, I have effectively gone from no one understands that this new industry called ag tech, well, it was, and now kind of more part of the climate tech exists. You need to educate everybody on why this is an opportunity, with change significantly. So there'll be a lot more impact-driven businesses, and a lot of them will be driven by women. This is just a lot of statistics that shows that will be the case, especially given the created category, the opportunity that is now out there that you're going to be exploring in the series of podcasts that you're going to be doing. It's just fascinating how many fantastic businesses are out there in this category now, and how many of them are driven by women, because this is not necessarily heavy manufacturing or defense or transportation, where you would naturally find just fewer women in those sectors. I think there is a lot better gender equality on the industry level. There is a lot of conversations of having women be able to get to the board positions if even they need to take a maternity break. There is a lot more equity on both parents taking breaks. And I think COVID has significantly accelerated our realization of how important that is to our society. There is more and more advocacy for women on corporate boards and on company boards. I was just yesterday with a company called He for She, a non-for-profit that helps place female advisors and independent directors on boards of companies. And I was introduced by one of my best female investors to them. And I certainly can say that the world is changing, and it's changing in front of my eyes. So I'm very hopeful that any of the challenges that I've encountered that maybe looked like, oh, I had to agree the industry will be middle-aged white men, and some of my advisors are middle-aged white men. There's nothing wrong with that. They're some of the best supporters of women I know. But there's just something that is very different about the inclusive perspective that gender balance brings into these equations. And there's a lot of social science on this that I'm not going to dive into that shows that companies just perform better when that balance is maintained well, perform better financially, resilient, again, all the good things. I think tide is changing on this. So hopefully by the end of this podcast, when you're ready to start your venture, you'll be like, this is going to be easy. I'm going to talk only to female VCs.
I really hope so. So could you provide any advice for mission-focused female founders?
I think don't be afraid of looking for what you think should be out there for you, because it is. It's just not as easy to find. Like the right partners, the right customers, the right people for your team, the right investors. There's enough people out there. And I think networking can get you places, all the places you possibly want to go. And it's really important to connect to the right people and to not be disheartened if you're not seeing the right type of community that or partners you want to bring along. And so I would just say keep looking. Perseverance, tenacity is everything. And keep testing your idea. If you want to be doing something new, I think the most important thing you can do is to prove to yourself that that idea is the one worth pursuing. And so pressure test it, stress test it with those who you think are your target customers or should be caring about this. And this is how you can really make sure you get the diamonds out of maybe the coal that you found.
One final question to you. What is your vision for Regrow and indeed your own future for the next 10 years? Do you think the impact that disruptive solutions are having is enough to make a difference?
If Regrow is successful, we will transform agriculture and our food system. Our farming system will be more resilient, more regenerative. Our soils will be healthier. We'll be able to support a growing population better. If we're successful, this means a vibrant ecosystem and agricultural activity that contributes to mitigation of climate change rather than contributes to part of the problem. And I believe that personally, I would like to see the world in which we see agriculture differently and farmers are really getting paid to do, I guess, what my parents did. They did all the right things on the small farm because they could afford to do it on the small farm. At the large scale, you need different incentives in order to do the right thing, and the whole society needs to get involved. So I'm just hoping that in 10 years, we will see a very significant change in this direction. I already see strong trends, and I think with the pace of change, we should expect to see it.
Great. Anastasia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Good luck with the series.
So that wraps up our first session for Greennovation. We really appreciate you taking out the time and sharing your insights.
Hello. We want to make this as interactive as possible. We want to know from viewers what they like, what they don't like. It's a very evolving process for us as well. Do you think there are any other interesting founders? If you yourself are a founder who's recently raised money and you think that you're creating something which is literally essential to stop climate change and reverse the impact, please do reach out to us at the email address, which is in the show notes. It's thegirls@greennovation.co.uk, or you can alternatively look us up on LinkedIn. You can stalk us on LinkedIn. I'm Shiva Jane or Sia Kulkarni, but obviously everything's in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about spelling. And we hope you enjoyed the first episode. We hope you learned a lot from it. We certainly did. Okay, thank you everyone, and see you next time. Bye, Sia.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening and stay tuned. Bye, Shubs.